What is going on, guys and girls? Hope you all are doing well. Thank you so much for having me again for another week of what I like to call Mind Over Markets. Just before we dive straight into today's session, can I just get a quick audio and visual check? Would you guys mind, especially in the Discord, just give me a quick yes or no if you can hear me and see me clearly? Awesome. Thank you guys so much. All right, we're going to get stuck straight in for today's session. As we've kind of been working through, this is now session number 3 that I've hosted with you guys. And as I've mentioned in some of our previous ones, hopefully you've had a chance to go through and have a watch back through those sessions. This is part 3 of a 4-part introductory into, I guess you can call it kind of mastering your trading psychology. What we're doing over these 4 sessions is laying some groundwork, some foundations to help you to really understand why we react the way that we react on a day-to-day and a week-by-week basis, and what we can do, how we can actually start leveraging some of this psychology to start working for us rather than against us in some instances. Now, if you're attending a session like this, I presume you've had some hurdles, you've had some battles, or you at least understand that there is some work to be done as part of improving your psychology, which is going to help you to make you a more consistent trader and to help improve your performance in the markets. Now, very briefly, before we dive into today, as I mentioned, this is part 3 of a 4-part introduction. I'm hoping everybody has had a chance to go back and watch the first 2 sessions that we did, because at least these first 4 sessions, they kind of build on top of each other. They build layer by layer to develop a deeper understanding as to what's going on internally, to help you to better understand why things are happening externally, right? It's the way I always like to think about things. So I want to start off very briefly by just giving you guys a brief recap of what we covered in last week's session. So last week, I say last week, it was a couple of weeks ago, but our last session specifically, we talked about 3 core topics which are really important to understand in terms of your psychology. The first one was this principle, this concept, this idea of System 1 and System 2. We talked about how we've taken this principle from a pretty well-known book. I'm sure some of you may have already read it or been through it, or at least maybe heard of it, called Thinking Fast and Slow by a psychologist called Daniel Kahneman. It's actually not trading related entirely at all, but it has a huge impact on how you perform in the markets because it allows you to better understand what's going on inside your head. So very briefly, this concept, this idea was showing that our mind has 2 modes of operation. We have System 1, which is quite quick, quite intuitive, but it's usually based on emotions. And then on the flip side, we have System 2, which is slower, it's a lot more deliberate, but it's usually based on logic. Now, both of these actually work together. Neither one of them is good nor bad, but they both play an important part of how it allows our mind to fulfill its primary objective. And for those of you that remember, the mind's primary objective is usually rooted around survival, right? It's usually designed to keep you away from fear, from danger, from pain, from threats, all of these types of things. And it is designed entirely to help to keep you alive. Now, both of these work at different times in different paces and can equally be beneficial in different instances. But in the context of what we're doing here, in the context of becoming a consistently profitable trader, or maybe someone that's just looking to take their performance at the moment and take it to the next level, it's important to understand how both of these modes work and potentially, in some instances, start to work against us. Now, for example, I mentioned that if you were a short-term trader, if you trade a lower time frame chart, if you're looking at being more of an intraday trader or a scalper to some degree, then actually you're far more likely, not guaranteed, but likely to be making decisions from your System 1 mindset, right? Your System 1, again, is that one that it's quick, it's intuitive, and it's usually based on emotion. It's what we normally refer to as kind of our fight or flight response, right? It's our immediate reaction to most situations. And the studies, the psychology that's presented inside of Thinking Fast and Slow, it seems to represent this idea that most of our initial reactions all come from System 1. Now, for those of you that have been in this industry for a while, you'll understand and you'll recall, I'm sure on many occasions, that usually acting from a place of emotion is not necessarily the best thing for you. What you need sometimes is to slow down. You need to take a breath. You need to be able to take a step back and to be able to make your next decision, usually based on logic and data, rather than the impulse that you're currently feeling at the moment. And the biggest part that distinguishes between system 1 and system 2 is the element of time, right? It's the element that most people lack, especially when you're short-term intraday trading, but it's the part that most people need to be able to allow their mind to accept certain situations and be able to make the decisions that you need when it comes to making those process-orientated and data-driven decisions on a day-to-day basis, right? So that was the first aspect of what we covered in the last session. We talked about the difference between system 1 and the difference between system 2. And if you guys went above and beyond, some of the things that we talked about in terms of the exercises that we left you with at the end of the session was actually getting you guys to start thinking about which parts of my life are controlled by system 1. Can I reflect on any actions, some thoughts, some decisions which were made based on the idea of coming from that system 1 mindset and then seeing an example of those actually shift to system 2 with some degree of time? One of the most common examples that we talked about is maybe getting into an argument or a disagreement with a partner, a family member, a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, saying something in the heat of the moment, and then later on immediately regretting that decision, right? Knowing you shouldn't have said it, going on to apologize, feeling bad. That's a prime example of system 1 and system 2 at play. And we see this in the markets too, making those impulsive decisions immediately, or sometimes with a certain degree of time, regretting those decisions, thinking back at the end of the day, looking at your performance, wondering why you FOMO'd into the market again, but not truly understanding how you can start to separate those two things, right? Stopping more system 1 decisions and provoking more system 2 decisions. So that was a key concept that we looked at in the last session, which again, if it sounds familiar, if you haven't yet had a chance to go back through it, I would highly recommend watching that session in full. The last couple of things that we talked about in that session is we talked about the idea of cognitive biases. We went through in detail, I think it was 5 or 6 very specific biases which impact us on a day-to-day basis, and they all impact how we perceive certain things which happen in the real world. And our perception of those things completely changes how we feel. How we feel completely influences how we act. And so again, if you want to make more data-orientated, process-driven decisions, then you need to make sure that you're prioritizing understanding which biases impact us and how these potentially work against us. One of the common ones that I talk about, again, just as a very brief recap, was the idea of recency bias. The idea that the human mind, in its natural form, is usually swayed to focus on things which happen in the more recent times. We don't prioritize what happens over a large sample size of time and in the context of what we're talking about today and trades, right? We tend to focus on what happens in the short term. And this is why we're constantly swayed by short-term outcomes. This is why we're more likely to feel overconfident after a win, and we're likely to doubt our strategy after a loss. It's not inherently anything bad against you. It's just part of the human mind. And again, being aware of that allows us to be in a place where we can actually start leveraging this. And you'll see this in some later sessions, and how we can start expanding and building on these things to give you some more favorable outcomes and approaches when it comes to how you go about doing business in the markets. Now, the last thing that we touched on is actually bringing the two of these ideas together. We talked about how system 1 and system 2 exists. We talked about how our mind can often work against us, especially when it comes to trying to thrive in a probabilistic environment. And the second thing was highlighting that because we naturally experience so many of these cognitive biases, the mind is actually quite an unreliable tool to rely on when it comes to, again, thriving inside of a probabilistic environment. So we talked about one of the most powerful things that you could start to do is develop this ability to be able to shift your perspective. We went through this analogy, this parable, talking about the Chinese farmer and the horse, and showing how, depending on any specific situation, you have complete control and the ability to be able to shift your perspective at any point in time to allow you to achieve a more powerful state internally, which is going to drive more powerful, more process-orientated and decisive actions externally, which again is going to be very, very beneficial for you as a trader, right? We then ended last week's session with a little bit of open Q&A, and we will continue to do that today as well. So if you guys do have any questions, either based on the content of what we're going to cover today, or based on anything psychology related, really, in terms of how it's impacting your performance in the markets, I will set aside some time towards the end of the session. If you guys do want to throw anything my way, more than happy to answer those questions. And primarily, I'm keeping an eye on the Discord conversation. So if you are watching on another platform and you would like to ask a question, make sure you jump into the Darwinex Discord. We have the live stream running there as well, and it's a great place to actually engage and get involved in a session like this. Now, for today's session, I would probably argue that between this and our following session in a couple of weeks, these are probably two of the most important concepts that I think it's important to take on to help improve your psychology in the markets. Now, this session specifically, we're going to be focusing on the idea of raising your awareness. Now, personally, in terms of my journey, in terms of the relationship that I've had with the hundreds of traders that I've had the good fortune to connect with and work with over the last 5 years that I've been in this business, I have found that your level of awareness is almost directly correlated to the performance that you seem to have in the markets. I tend to find that the traders that seem to do the best in the markets are the ones that have a high level of awareness to be able to recognize when their thoughts and when their emotions are starting to lead them astray. Now, something that I talk about a lot is in the 5 years that I've been coaching and working with traders and almost communicating with traders on a daily basis over that time period, the one thing that I have always found is that I am yet to meet a trader that has decided one morning they're going to wake up and they're just going to blow their account because they want to, because they like to. Nobody really likes to do this stuff. Nobody wants to act on FOMO. Nobody wants to revenge trade or overtrade. Nobody wants to have these bad habits. I can only presume that you are trying to improve yourself in this business because maybe you want more money, you want more freedom, you want more control over your life. You want all of the benefits that trading has to bring. And you wouldn't be spending your time or your energy on a call like this if you weren't trying to be better, if you weren't ambitious, if you weren't hardworking. So this idea that this self-sabotage, as most people like to title it, is something that controls you all of the time is not true. Because if you truly wanted to self-sabotage, you wouldn't spend your time here. You wouldn't share your time, your energy, and your attention on a call like this, because we are aimed at improving every single one of those things. So if you can all agree with that, if we can all agree on the idea that nobody wakes up in the morning and decides, today, I really want to blow my account, then the only rational and logical explanation as to why most people continue with these bad habits is that they are not truly present at the time when they are committing that behavior. They don't truly understand the detriment that it's going to have, or it's not the focus of what's going on internally. And that's what allows their mind and their emotions to run wild and to get the best of them and to allow them to control what specifically happens next. Okay, so this session is all about raising that level of self-awareness. I'm going to be sharing with you guys in today's session my 2 go-to practices to help you raise your level of awareness if you feel like it's something that you're lacking in. And for that's anyone that is struggling with bad habits, bad behavior, right? I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that I'm going to make you a perfect individual. But can I get you 70, 80, maybe even 90% of the way there, that you're going to be consistent most of the time, and that your actions, your mistakes, your hiccups, they're going to be limited to a very small proportion of your time in the markets. And even when you make those mistakes, they're going to cost you very little because your risk management is going to be on point. Is that totally achievable? 100%. But it all starts here. I truly believe that raising your awareness is the start to creating any level of change going forward. But it has to start with deliberate practice, right? I want you to remember that you are the person that you are today as a result of the beliefs, the experiences, the expectations, the lessons, everything that has gone on in your life has molded you to become the person that you are today. And so what I want you to understand is that one of the first things I want you to take away from this call specifically is firstly, yes, the importance of self-awareness, but as a byproduct of accepting that, you have to understand that we as human beings, your job as an aspiring trader is not trying to control emotions. That was something that I tried to do for many years, and it's one of the biggest reasons why it took me so long to find and have my breakthroughs, which got me on my path to profitability. I spent so long wishing that I could just not feel FOMO, or I could not be angry, or I could not revenge trade, or not have those impulses that get me to follow through with those actions. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible, right? There are certainly perspective shifts, digging deep and understanding why you feel certain things can certainly help you to resolve a lot of those problems. But I believe if that's your goal and your objective, to turn off all emotions, it is something that you're always going to struggle with. And if you speak to any successful trader, anybody that's really doing it in this game at a good level, they will be one of the first ones to show and to tell you that really emotions don't ever disappear. You don't get to this place when it comes to trading that suddenly FOMO never exists. The markets never annoy or piss you off on a day-to-day or week-by-week basis. It always happens. And in my experience, and I'm saying this from someone that's been 13 years in the game and still a student of the markets till this day, I tend to find that the markets have a way of getting under your skin at the best of times, right? So living with this idea or this hope or this dream or this fantasy that at some point in time, everything's just going to click, the markets are going to become easy, and things will, the market will just become this ATM that you can print money from on demand. It is a pipe dream for most people. But that doesn't mean that you can't find profitability. It doesn't mean that you can't find a certain degree of consistency that will allow you to make money over a large sample size of, again, time and trades. I'm not promising in any way, shape, or form that I'm going to get you to a state where you can make money every day, every week, every month, and every quarter. I don't believe, or at least I haven't seen any evidence of that being possible for everyone, right? The losing days, the weeks, the months, the periods of underperformance, they are completely normal. And part of improving your approach to the markets is understanding that we do not control emotions. We can only work to allow our emotions not to control us. That is something that's completely within your control, right? So what we're talking about here is not turning off emotions, but about changing how you respond to them. And the moment you make that mindset shift is the moment in time where you will develop an ability to start regulating how you feel and changing how you respond to specific situations. There are still times and situations, especially now, especially with how I trade, I go through periods of drawdown. And sometimes those periods can be 1 to 3 months on occasions. That is fairly standard for how I approach the markets. I don't trade too often, and my hit rate is sometimes around 20 to 40%, depending on the market conditions that we're in. But that's it. That's the peak for me. I trade off a daily time frame, which means that I don't trade too often. And when I'm not in sync with the market, that can last for a period of time. And so the thing that I have found for me, and this is going to resonate with you guys, regardless of what time frame you experience, you are going to go through a period of time where things do not work. Now, instead of trying to control and fight and battle all of the things that's happening internally, I find actually the quickest path to regaining your control in the markets is understanding that your job is not to turn them off. Your job is not to do battle with your mind and your emotions. Your job is to understand how to become aware of them, create space from them, and then change how you respond to them in a variety of different ways, which we're going to be talking about today. But for me, awareness is the foundation. It is the layer that everyone has to start with if you want to get to a place where you can better regulate emotions. So again, I'm not promising that all your emotions will disappear, but I'm promising with the right work and the right focus on certain areas, you can get to a point where you can become aware of and change how you respond to certain emotions. And this is how I operate each and every time an unhelpful emotion comes in, I guess, in my way as part of my trading, right? It's the sense of I experience FOMO, I see it, I feel it, I understand that it's exactly what I'm experiencing in the moment, but I can recognize and regulate that emotion to a degree where I can say it's not going to help me to act on that emotion in this moment. Therefore, I let it go and I do the things that I'm supposed to do in line with my plan, right? Having that sort of mindset and approach is what's going to allow you to develop the focus and the discipline that you need to best align you to be consistent as a trader. Okay. Now, in order to best demonstrate how we go about building this, I firstly want to give you guys some reflective points, right? If you're watching this live, even if you're watching this on a recording, I would highly recommend just taking a few moments to take in what I'm about to say and just think about an answer, how you would answer this question, just for at least 5 to 10 seconds, right? So if you're watching this live, I'm going to pause after each one of these questions. And I want you to just take a very brief moment to reflect on what those questions mean to you and how you think you would answer them if we were having this conversation face to face. Okay. Question number 1. Are you aware of your thoughts and emotions whilst you are trading? Not after the fact, whilst you are trading, right? Question number 1. Are you aware of your thoughts and emotions whilst you are trading? Take a second to think about that. Question number 2. How do you recognize when your thoughts and emotions turn negative? What actually changes for you, right? Let me repeat that. Question number 2. How do you recognize when your thoughts and emotions actually turn negative, and what specifically changes? Okay, again, take a moment, think about that. Think about how that translates into your trading. Is that something that you can actually do? Question number 3. Can you identify when your thoughts and emotions are positive? And how does that impact your trading? Right? Can you identify when your thoughts and emotions are positive? And how does that actually impact your trading? And the fourth and final question that I want to run by you guys today. Right now, in this very moment, what are you thinking and feeling? Right? Question number 4, right now in this very moment, what are you thinking and feeling? Okay, so 4 very basic reflective questions. What I'm going to do, I'm going to actually copy and paste these into the Discord chat so that you guys have a reference to them if you want to reference them after the session at a later point in time. And again, for those of you on Discord, you will have access to those, right? The raw reality of the reason why I start with these reflective questions is these are probably questions that most people have never actually considered. Most people have never stopped to ask themselves, are they actually aware of their thoughts and emotions whilst they're trading? Most people have never stopped to understand what the signs are when your mind and your emotions are shifting from positive to negative or negative to positive. Most people don't understand what that process looks like. And the fourth question, completely rooted in mindfulness, are you aware of what you are experiencing in this very moment? It's a very, very simple reflective exercise to get you guys to understand that most of us on a day-to-day basis, we simply operate on autopilot. We simply operate with a pre-programmed piece of software, which is why we respond to certain situations and then later on regret it, especially with the context of what we're talking about here in terms of your performance in the markets. The key to starting to break free of all of those things, whether it's changing your perspective, whether it's going through breath work, whether it's walking away from the charts, whether it's adding rules and limitations as to how many trades you can take on a day-to-day or week-by-week basis. All of those things are a prerequisite to actually becoming aware that you are experiencing them in the moment. Because if you're not truly aware that your mind is starting to be driven and controlled by FOMO or anger or revenge or boredom or any one of these emotions, which is typically detrimental as a trader, it becomes impossible to do anything about it. There is no point in spending your time and energy on sessions like this if you're only going to get to the end of your day and recognize in hindsight that you've made a mistake, right? So this is why this is arguably one of the most important things that you can develop as a trader that's aspiring to improve their psychology. And it's all about raising your level of awareness. Now, what I'm going to cover today is not based on any of the unorthodox trading psychology stuff, right? We're not going to be talking about cold showers. We're not going to be talking about, running around doing headstand. Like, I've heard a variety of wild things that are preached when it comes to improving your approach in the markets. Everyone has a different opinion. And again, rightfully so, because everyone is different. But for me, there are two time-tested principles that if you adopt and if you pick up, they are almost guaranteed to give you what you want in terms of raising your awareness, right? They are backed by numerous studies, especially in the field of psychology. And they are, like I said, almost guaranteed to give you what you want in terms of raising that level of awareness. Now, I want to root you back to where we started today's session, right? With this insight or this idea that the vast majority of people don't wake up in the morning intending to make a mistake or to blow their account. It doesn't happen. We all have good intentions. We all want to do well. We all want to succeed. We all want to make a bunch of money from the markets, right? If that is inherently true, then I want to remind you guys that if you are making mistakes, if you are constantly repeating bad behavior, if you can't seem to get a grip and to regulate your mind in the way that you need, it is typically happening as a result of either being too focused on the past or the future. I heard some amazing advice, and it was far more poetically put than I could probably ever come up with. But it was this idea that most people only find success in life when you learn to do three things, right? And you can apply this to any area of life, but we're going to talk about it in the context of trading, right? You find success as a trader when you develop the ability to do three things. When you can, number one, learn from the past. Number two, when you can develop a framework and a process to plan for the future. And number three, when you can be present to live in this very moment. When you can trade in this moment, when you can trade based on what you see rather than what you think, you start to become a very, very powerful trader. Now, on the opposite side to this, the reason most traders generally struggle, especially when it comes to the psychological approach, is it happens as a result of three opposing things, right? The first one is you are haunted by the past. You're not learning. You're not taking lessons away. You're simply haunted by the mistakes that you've made in the past, and you don't allow yourself to just forgive yourself, to get to a time and a place where you can accept that the past is the past and it cannot be changed. Instead, you kick yourself for the mistakes that you continually make over and over again. That's perspective number one. Perspective number two is you're too focused on the future. You're too worried about trying to achieve a certain result, a certain percentage. You're too focused on trying to hit a certain target to pass your prop firm challenge. That seems to be the big one in this day and age, right? When you are too focused on the future, and especially around something that you cannot directly control, you're almost left in a state whereby you're anxious, right? You have zero control over what's going to happen in the future. And as a result, you are left in a state of anxiety. And the third and final one, as a result of being focused on the past or the present, the thing that the place that you find yourself in is that you can't seem to be present. You can't seem to focus on what is happening in this very moment. And that's completely detrimental, because the present moment is the only one which you can act in, which will change what happens in your future. Your present moment is the most powerful because it's the only one that's going to allow you to create the shifts and changes that you need to create the outcomes that you are looking for. So your job is to break free from those. Your job is to learn from the past instead of being haunted by it. Your job is not to be anxious about the future, but it's to plan and prepare for what's going to happen in terms of how you're going to get there. And finally, your job is to be present. It's to understand what is going on internally. What am I thinking? What am I feeling in this very moment? Because if I have awareness of that, I have a better odds of being able to understand that acting on this emotion or this thought is not really going to be beneficial for me in the long run when it comes to doing our primary job in the markets. And that is always not about prediction, but just about managing risk effectively. That's all you really have control over. You can do your best to predict what's going to happen in the market, but you can never really control the outcome. The traders that are focused on prediction seem to be the ones that continually lose in the long run, because they are inevitably going to put themselves in a state where they are disappointed by an unfavorable outcome. Whereas the trader that focuses on risk management can never really lose. As long as they are cutting losses and maximizing winners, they are doing their job as risk managers. It doesn't matter whether they're ending the specific trade with a small loss, a small win, or a big win. Those are all favorable outcomes and means that you are doing your job as a trader. Okay? Now, let's get into the meat of today. In terms of, we talked about, and we spent quite a bit of time on talking about the importance of raising your awareness and how making that mindset shift can actually put you in a completely different state, which can better get you to use your mind and your psychology on your side rather than actually working against you, which typically happens for most people, right? There are two practices that I kind of teased a little bit earlier that I want to share with you guys today that I think will completely transform your psychological approach to the markets. The first one is keeping a good trading journal. Now, I would like to hope and presume that most people have a journal of some kind, right? I am about the idea and the philosophy that the holy grail that most traders are looking for is in their journals. It's in your ability to document what is happening in the markets, as well as why you are making those decisions. And that latter point is the part that most people actually miss, right? It's the part that most people that actually, go above and beyond to try and improve their approach to the markets have a journal, but they're only really journaling the strategic element. This is the trades that I've taken today. This is what got me into the market. This was the criteria that I followed, and this was the outcome, right? And again, those are very important points, things that you need to be aware of in terms of approving your edge in the markets. You need a journal because your mind, as we discussed in our last session together, is pretty unreliable, right? The human mind, in our ability to remember certain events with a high degree of accuracy, is pretty unreliable. So having a journal is absolutely mandatory. But the part that most traders miss is understanding that your journal shouldn't just be a place where you document the trades that you are taking. It has to be combined with documenting the rationale behind why you made those specific decisions. If you got out of a trade early, whether it was for profit or for loss, why did that happen? If you got into a trade early, whether that ended up costing you or making you more money, why did that happen? Until you can truly understand why you're making the decisions that you're making and what is driving those things, it becomes almost impossible to break that pattern of behavior. And so how I like to share it with most of the traders that I work with is I want you to understand that journaling is simply a tool to help increase your level of self-awareness. If you're documenting the right things in terms of your strategic element as well as your psychological element, right? And that, by the way, means documenting what you're thinking and feeling before, during, and after closing a trade. It's going to become your holy grail to help highlight patterns of thought, patterns of behavior, and thirdly, the pattern between both of those things. Because what you're going to start to identify is every time I make a mistake and I act on tilt, I revenge trade, I overtrade, I trade out of boredom, I get into the market because of FOMO, you're going to recognize that there is an external driver, right? We like to call them triggers, right? There's an external trigger which is driving that thought or the emotion. That thought turns into an emotion, and that emotion is usually what influences the behavior. So when most people sit there and say, right, this week I'm going to focus and I'm not going to overtrade anymore, I'm not going to revenge trade anymore. It's helpful to say that, obviously, in most instances. But what you're doing is you're focusing on the outcome. The mistake has already happened. The lapse in judgment, the flaw in your perception has already happened. If you don't identify that, everything later down the line doesn't seem to make as much sense, right? When you start to understand that today I overtraded, but the issue is actually that I haven't had a trade in 48 hours and I didn't address or recognize the fact that I was starting to feel bored, because I presumed that as a trader, I should be trading every day. That's what I see online. That's what I see on social media. That's what I see when I jump into the communities that I'm part of and people are making money when I'm sitting on the sidelines. These are the elements that most people miss. These are the elements that most people overlook. The boredom, the idea or the urge to get into the market was already present before you even stepped up to the chart that day. And the way the human mind works is that you will find more of what you are looking for. But you have to recognize what was the trigger to begin with. And again, if you're only going by memory, you're never going to be able to identify it in the long run. It's never going to work out for you. And the example that I give most people is I ask them, could you tell me what you had for lunch yesterday? Most people probably could. I'll give you guys the benefit of the doubt. I'm presuming most people probably could. Could you tell me what you had for lunch 3 days ago? How about a week ago, or a month ago, or a quarter, or 6 months ago? Could you recall what you had on this very day 1 year ago for lunch? Chances are probably not. And this is the flaw to our memory, the human mind, right? We can only hold a certain amount of data in our conscious mind. And so if you really want to have a good recollection of what is driving our thoughts, our emotions, and subsequently our behavior, you have to be writing it down. So this is your cue. This is your takeaway, that if you are not already doing so, if you don't have a journal at all, that's something that has to change after today. If you're somebody that has a journal that is documenting the trades that you are taking, fantastic. But then I want you to start building on that. I want you to start writing down. It can be brief bullet points. It doesn't have to be a page-long essay behind it. Just start with brief keywords. What's going on internally? Why am I taking this decision, right? You need to be documenting before, during, and after every trade that you take why you have made the decisions that you decided to make. And it's only once you start to collect all of those pieces of data, you will be able to look back and start connecting the dots. You will start understanding that the reason I was so easily triggered by this trade that missed my limit order by 2 pips today was actually because I had an A+ setup yesterday that I was really hoping and praying would win, but ended up in the quickest stop out that I've ever had, and I was pissed off. And I didn't let go of that performance yesterday, and I brought it with me today, and it's made me highly susceptible to an unfavorable outcome that's happened today. And as a result, you've been on tilt and you've lost a bunch of money that you did not want to do, right? So the more that you can journal your thoughts and your feelings throughout your trading week, you're going to start to be able to understand that thoughts lead to an emotion, and emotions usually influence actions to a high degree, right? A lot of the time. So this, when you're collecting all this data, again, over a large sample size, this is what's going to provide you that holy grail to start understanding how you can make the most of your reflection periods to start improving your performance over time. When you have a journal and then you set aside time to reflect and connect the dots and understand why you've done certain things, that's where the magic starts to happen, right? So you're going to start to understand that. A couple of examples that I think are usually very common for a lot of people. If you're someone that ends up, you start the day with a really, really good plan, but then you end your day and you look back and you've taken a load of trades that you didn't even plan to take. You start to understand that actually the issue was the loss that I took yesterday, right? The loss that I took yesterday gave me this complete misalignment of expectations going forward. That allowed me to be frustrated going into my new trading day. And that's what spurred me to take unplanned trades, simply because I did not have the right expectations in terms of accepting that initial loss that has led to the situation that I'm currently experiencing. For example, maybe you're somebody that just overtrades. Again, most of the time you do the right things, but sometimes, and you don't understand why in the moment, you tend to just take trades that are completely outside of your plan. You don't know why, but you end up having one day where you have 4 or 5 trades, but typically you only get 2 or 3 trades a week, right? And again, you start to trace it back. You start to understand that you're in unfavorable market conditions for your edge, which means you're not really getting any setups. But instead of sitting on your hands, instead of having something to preoccupy yourself, instead of having something else to dive into to keep your mind busy, you don't have a plan. You don't know what to do in that situation. And as a result, you experience boredom. And the natural reaction to boredom is interest, right? I want to do something interesting. I want to do something to make my mind occupied. And that's what puts you in a position of eventually overtrading, right? So very, very simple examples here, but helping you guys to understand the power between keeping the right level of journal that you're looking for. If you're someone that's got bad habits, bad behaviors, and you're not really sure how to break free of them, you need to be making sure that you are documenting the right things in terms of your journals. Okay, so that's step number one, making sure that you're keeping the right amount of information inside your journal so that when you have those reflection periods, you can identify the triggers that are causing you to make the mistakes going forward. The second side to this, and this is the second time-tested principle backed up by numerous studies that I think would be very, very powerful for you guys to start adopting as part of your trading day, is a practice of mindfulness, right? We already talked about the idea that most people make mistakes usually because they are not truly present. They don't really know what's going to happen for them or what this action is going to lead to in the long run, and they simply operate on autopilot. Now, when I talk about the idea of being mindful, I'm talking about the practice of being present and engaged in the moment without feeling any judgment. And that last part, not feeling judgmental about what you're experiencing, is actually very, very important. We all need to develop an ability to become an observer of your mind. It's a powerful position to be in, and it's one of the states that quickest allows you to achieve a state of peace, right? This is the thing that I choose to prioritize most, and I find that it's had the most significant impact in terms of how I respond in a variety of situations in the markets, right? Everyone needs, as an aspiring trader, to develop an ability to observe thoughts without actually acting on them. And I find that learning to be present, and there's a couple of ways that I would recommend this, and I'm going to give you a very short demonstration of one in a second, but you can actually train this. Because again, I go back to this idea, and something that I would have mentioned on a previous call, is that I believe everybody has come into the world neutral. Nobody was born patient. Nobody was born with a lack of patience. Nobody was born with a short fuse or naturally angry. These are all things that you learned how to do along the way, right? So for most people, you have to understand that if you learn to be a certain way, if you learn to not be present and learn to operate on autopilot, you can learn to break free of that pattern, but it requires a certain level of training. That training is going to really be focused on the idea of learning to just observe your mind without acting. Because what most people are trained to do in this situation is observe and immediately react. If I feel angry, I'm going to act angry. If I feel bored, I'm going to fix that boredom. If I feel sad, I'm going to act sad. If I feel happy, I'm going to act happy. There is no disconnection between what happens internally and how you separate from not acting on those things externally, right? And so we go back to this idea that mindfulness is going to be an important part of your journey because it's going to help you to break free of your patterns of behavior. You can't break free of cyclical patterns if you're not aware that they're actually taking place in the moment. You're going to become the typical person that I usually tend to communicate with, which is I'm making a mistake and usually I get to the end of my day and I'm kicking myself about it after the fact. I want you to recognize and get to a place where you can recognize that you're making a mistake in this moment, and that's not going to be good for you in the long run. The moment you can start doing that, it's much easier to start breaking free of those patterns of behavior, right? So with a little bit of work, you're going to start becoming aware of what's happening in this very moment. And that practice is actually going to work to become a new habit. Recognizing and asking yourself what is going on internally can become a habit and something that you train yourself to do over a period of time, right? Two main ways that I recommend actually developing this ability. Again, none of them are based on my opinion. They're based on studies which have shown that if you practice these over a large enough sample size, they can develop an ability to help make you more present. The first one is one that I'm actually going to demonstrate live on today's call. And I like recommending this one because it's quick, it's easy, it requires no tools, no technology. And in the space of, I would say, anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes usually, you can develop an ability to let go of a state, a feeling, a thought that is currently weighing you down, and you can get back to a place of equilibrium. So if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling weighed down by decisions and things that have happened yesterday, but you've got stuff to do in the markets, you've got decisions to make, you've got your strategy to execute on, this is a really, really quick way to help you to reset and to be more present and to focus on doing the right things going forward, right? The first one I want to take you through is an exercise called box breathing, okay? Some of you may have heard of this. Some of you might be completely new to this idea, but it's a simple breathwork technique that you can do literally sitting at your charts, and it will completely transform your ability to actually be present in each and every moment whilst you're trading, okay? Now, the reason that this specific breathwork technique is quite powerful is the way that I learned it is your breath is the center of every emotion that you experience, right? And if you don't quite understand what I'm referring to here, I want you to think about this for a second. If you are someone that is angry, if you had to picture someone in your mind that was angry, what would that look like to you? Just take a second, visualize someone that's angry, frustrated. What does that look like to you? And specifically, I want you to notice how they're breathing. Are they taking deep, calm breaths? Are they breathing quite quickly? Are they breathing deep or shallow? What does that look like in your mind? Okay, once you've got that image, I want you to flip that for a second. I want you to ask yourself, what does someone look like when they are calm, when they're relaxed, when they're at peace? Are they breathing the same way as the person that's angry and agitated in a particular situation? I'm going to go out on a limb here and I'm going to guess they're not. Otherwise, I would presume most people's perception of angry and calm are probably not correctly rooted, right? Your breath is the center of every emotion that you experience. And this is often why when people are frustrated, there is that common saying of someone saying, just breathe, take a step back, just breathe. Because it comes from the idea that we are breathing in a way that is not rooted in maybe the state that we want to be feeling, right? So if your breath is the center of every emotion that we experience, then actually you can start using your breath and intentionally breathing in a way to help change the state that you are experiencing. So very, very quickly, box breathing is a very, very simple technique which is going to allow you to reset and change what you're feeling internally. And it can be done very, very quickly, right? The entirety of box breathing is 4 stages. Step number 1 is you're going to inhale. You're going to breathe in and count to the count of maybe 4 or 5, okay? Once you've taken that breath in and you've inhaled for the count to 4 or 5, you're then going to hold your breath for the count to 4 or 5, okay? After you've held your breath, you're then going to exhale for the count to 4 or 5. And then once you've exhaled, let all the breath out, you're then going to hold on the exhale for 4 to 5 seconds. And then you're going to repeat this for, usually I recommend somewhere between 3 to 5 minutes. So I'm going to give you a very, very quick demonstration on this call. I'm going to count using the fingers on my hand because I'm going to be doing the breath work as we go through it. But I want it to be a very brief example. So it's inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold, right? So it looks something like this. You start by breathing in. That's it. That's one round of box breathing. That was inhaling for 4 to 5 seconds, holding your breath for 4 to 5 seconds, exhaling for 4 to 5 seconds, and then holding after the exhale for 4 to 5 seconds, and then simply repeating that for 3 to 5 minutes, right? There are actually some fantastic guided videos on this on YouTube, which I would highly recommend. You jump on YouTube, guided box breathing. And there are some great videos that can talk you through the process, especially if you're new to this, if you want to get a grip on doing it. But I promise you, it's very, very simple. And it's something that you won't need the guided sessions to accompany with you for so long, right? It's a great way to manage stress and refocus yourself throughout your trading day. And it's powerful because actually it engages both the body and the mind, right? What we talked about in terms of those keys of living a good life, we found that most people struggle because they are focused on the past or focused in on the future. When you align your body and your mind, what you're doing is you're focusing your breathing and you're counting in alignment with that, and you're engaging both of those things, both the body and the mind. And the moment you do that, you are forced to be present, right? It's very, very difficult to go through the process of box breathing where you're counting in alignment with your breath and to still focus on the idea that you're pissed off with the trade that you took yesterday. If you focus on the breathing and you focus on your counting, you're engaging both of these things together, and that's going to be a very, very powerful way to force you to focus on the present moment. You're focusing on your breath that is happening right now, and you're intentionally breathing in a way that is slowing things down. You're no longer breathing fast. You're no longer breathing so heavy. You're no longer going to be in a state that is deeply linked with frustration, anger, FOMO, whatever it is. So tip number one of today is if you're experiencing an emotion that you do not want to be feeling, if you've recognized because of your journals, this is not going to put me in a state which is beneficial for me in the long run, I want you to go through a quick exercise of box breathing, right? Taking a moment, and this can be done in your trading day, to focus on your breathing 3 to 5 minutes and then come back to your charts. Having that little bit of space is not only going to ground you in the present moment, but from what we discussed in session 2, our last session, it's going to create a little bit of time between taking one action to the next. And from what we understand based on our last discussion, that's going to give you better chances of shifting your mind from system 1 to system 2. Again, intuitive, emotional responses, then shifting to logical, deliberate actions going forward, right? So box breathing, very, very powerful. Again, would highly, highly recommend you guys trying that out throughout your trading day. If anything, I want you to jump off the back of this call and give it a go. 3 to 5 minutes does not need to take up your entire day and can be done once you understand the process of working through it. Again, YouTube's going to be a great resource for this. It is going to be a great place to help you to just ground yourself and become present very, very quickly. Okay. Now, the second practice I want to recommend, and I know this is something that has started to become a little bit more popular online in this day and age, but one that I think can easily be improved. I find a lot of people practice this the wrong way, but it can easily be improved with a very, very simple mindset shift. And that practice is meditation, right? There are going to be maybe some of you watching this live or on the recording that have experimented with meditation, but what I tend to find is that there are a lot of people that have either thought about it and never tried it, or they've gone about and decided that actually it's not really something that works too well for them. Okay. Now, what I want you guys to understand is most people that struggle with meditation, they do so because their objective for what they are trying to achieve is completely wrong before they've even started the practice. Right? Now, when you talk to most people that have tried and dismissed meditation, one of the main reasons they've dismissed it is because their objective is, for example, peace, calmness, getting rid of frustration, anger, all of these types of things. You're giving yourself a specific emotion that you would like to achieve. And in some cases, it might happen. It might be achievable, but there are going to be some days, I can promise you, where it doesn't happen. You're going to finish your meditation and you're not going to feel any better. You're going to feel anger. You're still going to be frustrated. You're still going to be wanting to act as a result of FOMO. And the thing that I relay to most people is that the goal of meditation isn't about peace. It's about awareness, right? So I like to think of meditation as something that I do proactively, either at the start or the end of my day. More often than not, I like to do it at the start of my day. But it's going to help me to understand how I can be more mindful, how I can be more present, how I can recognize my thoughts in the moment. And the way in which you do that will depend on how you practice it. And the way that I recommend most people go about it is you decide from the very beginning that your goal is not a specific state. Your goal is to simply sit and observe your mind. And during that time, you might do it for 2 minutes, you might do it for 5 minutes. Again, if you're new to this practice, I would recommend keeping it as small and as easy as possible. You can always intensify the practice later down the line, but at the start of your journey, make it easy and achievable to do consistently, okay? That's what's going to keep you in the game. That's what's going to allow you to be consistent with it. And that's what's going to allow you to achieve all the good benefits because you've stuck with it for so long, okay? But you want to make sure that you sit down. Your goal is about awareness. And when you go to practice it, all you're going to start doing is focusing on your breath. You're going to close your eyes. You're going to focus on each breath in, and you're going to focus on each breath out. Now, the moment you do this, you're going to recognize that at some point in time, without fail, your mind is going to start to drift. Your mind is going to start to wander. You're going to start to recognize that I'm thinking about the trade that I took yesterday, all the stuff that I have to deal with today, or picking up the kids later on. It could be anything, right? But your mind will think, and it will take your mind to a different place. You'll lose focus on your breath, and you'll focus on something else. Now, in that very moment, what you're going to find is your job is to become aware that your mind has drifted. Because the moment you become aware that you're lost in thought, you're no longer lost in thought. And the more that you practice this each and every day, the better you will become at training your mind to recognize what it is experiencing in the moment. So you're going to sit down, you're going to build the right intention to begin with, you're going to close your eyes, you're going to focus on your breath in, your breath out, and just continually repeat that. And then at some point in time, your mind is going to drift, and it is your job to recognize, I've become lost in thought. You're not going to judge it. You're not going to be angry at yourself because you weren't able to clear your mind. You're going to allow that thought to let go. You're going to see it flow out of your head and off and into the distance, and you're going to refocus yourself back on your breathing. You give it 5 seconds, 10 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, your mind will repeat that. It will drift again. You'll get lost in thought. Your job will be to recognize that thought, let it go, and to come back to the present moment. Focus again on the breath. And again, repeat this for the period of your meditation practice. Now, the reason this will change your life is because, and again, the way I perfectly or poetically heard it put, is that meditation makes you aware. Awareness creates space between your thoughts and your actions, because now you're seeing what's going on inside your mind before you're acting on it, right? So meditation creates awareness. Awareness creates space. With that space, it actually gives you time. And with that time, it allows you to make a choice of how you want to act. So the more and more you sit down to recognize your thoughts during that deliberate practice, you're training your mind to become aware of your thoughts. So at some point in time, what you're going to find is throughout your trading day, you're going to find that because you're doing this practice, at some point in time, you're going to feel angry, you're going to feel annoyed, you're going to feel FOMO, you're going to feel like taking revenge on the markets. But before acting on that and then recognize it in hindsight, you're going to recognize that thought in your mind. Because you're aware of it, it's now created a space between the thought and the action. That space creates the time. And with that time, you develop the ability to give yourself a choice over, do I want to act on this? My journals tell me that every time I do this, it doesn't bode well for me in the long run, right? I now have an ability or an opportunity to change my perspective to say, I want to do something different going forward. Now, the one thing I want to add to this